And before I invite Anne to introduce Seido, I'll just read a brief statement about Dana. In Buddhism, when practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana are to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. You can either do this directly or through Great Tree, and we will pass it on to them. And so I will put into the chat box a link where you can practice dana, practice giving to Great Tree directly through the PayPal. And please specify what the dana is for. And you can do that by sending an email to info@greattreetemple.org. And Seido, how would you like to receive dana for this talk?
Thank you. And make sure, I'm not muted. I'm sorry. I'd be happy to see any dana go to Great Tree, actually. I'm a lay person and I have the support of a job and everything. And our Sangha here in Charlotte is doing quite well. So I would suggest that if people feel generous and want to support the practice, that they support Great Tree. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all I've got. So I'll pass it to you, Anne.
Okay. Well, we're fortunate this morning to have Don Seido here to give a Dharma talk on encouragement for lay practice. And he's an amazing example of that. He's practiced with the Charlotta Zen Meditation Society since 1990, and he now leads the practice group. He was ordained as a lay teacher by Teijo of Great Tree. So we're so happy to welcome you, Don Seido.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much, Trey. And welcome, everyone. I appreciate everyone being here on a Saturday morning. And I'd like to just remind everybody, this is an ongoing series of talks, Dharma talks, on Saturday mornings. And you can find a schedule at the Great Tree Zen Temple website. There's a talk scheduled, I believe, for every Saturday, probably for the rest of the summer. And you can see the participants and the titles of the talks there. And like I said, in case I forget to mention it later on about dana, I do appreciate that. And like I said, as a layperson myself, I have plenty of support. And so I appreciate it. And I would just as soon see people direct their generosity towards Great Tree Zen Temple. And that would be really fine. I appreciate that. I'll get started. The title of my talk today is Encouragement for Lay Practice. And not to get into it too much, but I'm not so sure that encouragement is any different for lay people than it is for monks and priests. But I realize that most of us are lay practitioners. I certainly am and have been for 30 years. And I believe most people in America are lay practitioners. And that presents interesting challenges in life. I think, we all understand that if you're a monk or a priest and you've made that very serious commitment to so to speak, leave everyday life and go off and practice at a monastery or a temple. You're practicing in a very structured environment where things are set up for you and you participate in them daily, all day long. And it makes practice more focused and easier to follow than it does for a lay person. We have challenges of so many distractions, not to say that people practicing in a temple or a monastery don't have distractions and things, but I'm going to focus on the lay practice today. And I was just thinking a little bit earlier, you know, we just experienced 30 minutes of Zazen before we got started this morning. And I was thinking about the idea of intention. You know, each one of us can ask ourselves, why did we sit down this morning? Why did we sit for 30 minutes? And I think we take that for granted sometimes when we're doing Zazen. It can mean so many different things to so many of us, but really there must be something there that calls you to sit down. And that would be your intention for Zazen. Why did you sit down? And did you have an expectation or not? You know, it's fine either way if you had an intention or not an intention. But that informs us in our practice and what we can expect and what will happen and what kind of experience we'll have, our intention of Zazen. From a lay point of view, you know, I think all of us understand this is a spiritual practice. And so, you know, when we study the Buddha's teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and so forth, we become very aware that in our practice, we shouldn't cling to things, obviously. And so then there comes a question of, are we clinging to the very Zazen we're doing, you know, our very practice of sitting down? And that always brings up a lot of interesting ideas. You know, generally you just have to be aware of what your intention is. When you sit down and do Zazen, you know, you clear your mind, you make as honest an effort as you can to not engage yourself in thinking and be involved in things and to let go and to not cling to an expectation of what your Zazen will be like. And that will take many different forms in everyone who practices, and it'll also change over time. Early on in your practice, I think just getting yourself to sit on the cushion and settle down and not be so distracted is in and of itself the practice. It is what you deal with. And in that sense, when you're doing it, you have to try and not cling too tightly to the idea that there is a correct way to sit or not sit, or that you're doing it quote unquote right, or doing it well or doing it poorly. All of that is just the kind of thing that will just kind of keep your mind in confusion rather than settling down and getting quiet. You have to just sort of relax and give up those expectations. So, you know, what I'm going to be talking about today a little bit is, in a way, a kind of introduction to Zazen, but I don't want it to be just that. Like I said in the title, I want it to be an encouragement for practicing Zazen. As I see it right now, all of us, regardless of our, you know, whether we're lay people or not or whatever, one of our obstacles right now is this, you know, pandemic situation that we have, because obviously right now we're meeting on Zoom and not meeting in person. And I find this awkward, and I'm sure a lot of other people do too. It's just in a purely straightforward sense, it's not something that I've been used to. You know, for many, many years I've sat with a Sangha, and it's a very small Sangha, but nonetheless it is real people sitting in a room together, which is always how I've perceived the idea of Sangha, and I've had to kind of re-understand that as being electronic here for the last year and a half. So how do we keep on with this practice with this little extra added burden? And I want to get around to talking a little bit. I hope I won't forget by the time I talk a little while about the sort of joy of sitting. I think that's something we don't talk about much in Zazen. We're all so serious, and we study Dharma and we read Dogen, and everybody gets very philosophical. And then we sort of forget, oh yeah, what the Buddha taught us originally was, not to cling, to give up our delusions and things, and we could actually be free. And when you're free, you can be a lot happier, a lot more joy in your life. And I don't know, but I tend to forget that all the time. I take this practice as a kind of a serious spiritual obligation, and I just forget to have any kind of joy with it. So I'll try to get back to that in a minute. But a couple of days ago, I read the Fuka Zanzenge again. I used to read it more regularly and chant it, but I haven't recently. So I read it. And I was just thinking about some of the basic ideas that Dogen talks about. He starts out with the observation that, when we practice and start practicing a little bit and doing Zazen regularly, we do awaken some. We begin to get some awareness of what this practice is about and see it reflected in our lives and the lives of the people around us. And, we start to think, okay, well, I think I know what I'm doing here. I've got some idea of this. And then at the same time, he turns right around and cautions us about that and says, hey, if you miss this just by an inch, you miss it by a mile. You have to be always mindful and always bringing yourself back to these core concepts like the Four Noble Truths, and realize that if you start clinging to a notion that you understand things, that you have some awareness, that's not complete. It's not, you're not seeing the wholeness, the completeness of everything. So you have to always keep coming back to your practice. He goes on from there with just, very simple, pragmatic advice on sitting. And I hope this is appropriate for everybody. I have no idea necessarily who I'm talking to and how much sitting you've done or not done. But I think it's always good to reflect on some of the simple ideas. They're very commonsensical, but sometimes we just don't pay attention to them. You have to take care of yourself physically if you want to have a Zazen practice and for it to kind of work for you. You have to get enough sleep. Most people sit early in the morning, I do. And so, you can't expect to go to bed at midnight or 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning and get up at 5 and be able to sit coherently and not struggle. You have to use common sense. I know Dogen mentions eating in the Fukan Zazenge. You can't eat a big meal right before you sit down to do Zazen, or a meal that's got a lot of spices or something in it, and expect to sit there very calmly and be able to sit Zazen. You have to use just the kind of common sense you'd use every day in preparing yourself for this. As far as encouragement, I think over the years I've had this discussion with so many people: is Zazen hard and difficult, or is it easy? And really, it doesn't really make any difference how you argue it, which way or the other. I think it comes down a lot to the physical memory of your body and your mind. If you set yourself up in a practice and you get into the habit of going and sitting, as Teijo always says, just get yourself to the cushion, meaning, that once you get there and you sit down on that cushion, it takes over after that point. Your physical body just has a memory that will take over. most of us struggle with the step that comes a step or two before that, when it's when we perceive that we have other options. I'm tired, I'm sleepy, I could rest instead of doing this, or somebody else has an activity that they're inviting me to do and I could do. So that comes back to your intention and why you're sitting to begin with, and do you have any expectations of it or not, and if so, what they are. And this is where it can become subtle, because it is going to be a matter that comes down to each individual person. When we reflect on the Four Noble Truths and so forth, we know we shouldn't cling to the idea of there's going to be benefits from sitting Zazen, although yes, there are benefits, but we have to practice. I know this is where the subtlety of it comes in. We have to practice without clinging to those benefits. What are the benefits? Well, when I sit down and do Zazen, I was thinking about it earlier when we sat. This will probably be the only half-hour span of this entire day where I sat quietly and didn't involve myself in anything. And that's probably true for most of us sitting, because we're going to get up from this Zazen and from this talk, and we're going to go get involved in life again, or activities. So really, that period of Zazen during the day is the only period of time out of this entire day where you're going to sit quietly and be with yourself rather than being involved in activities. And I think that's significant, even if you wanted to look at it from a non-Zen or non-Buddhist point of view. You have just sat for a half hour or whatever length of time, and you have actually directed some attention to yourself and your life rather than being distracted by everything else that's going to happen today. And there is value in that. You do learn from it. And, I especially think over time, by bringing yourself back to that quiet place and that calmness, and letting go of all those other things that you're normally engaged in, and doing it repeatedly over and over, will bring you a sense of calm. There's no great promise of things, but it does help you to focus on your life a little bit more, and to let go of some of the things that you're clinging to that are not necessary. They're just extra baggage that you're carrying along that really you can do without. The more you examine those things, the more you'll see that you can do without things. So how do we do this and find any sense of joy in it? We study the Dharma and the practice, and like I said, Dogen can be especially philosophical, and sometimes you lose a sense of, am I going to get anything out of this other than a sense of philosophical satisfaction? And I don't have a great answer for this. I mean, I know when I sit Zazen and I get up after a half hour or so, no, I'm not giggly or, unusually happy or anything. So that's not an expectation that I have. And I'm sure probably most people don't. But I think you will develop a sense, I guess I would use the word satisfaction maybe, rather than some of the other words. It's not always an outright joy, but sometimes it can be. But a sense that you have taken your own life seriously enough to have taken this amount of time and set it aside from all your other daily routines, and you've spent a half hour being with yourself, so to speak. And I say that, and I immediately, think, well, I'm always reminded of the Bodhisattva vow when I say, I was sitting with myself, because I wasn't sitting just with myself. That's another of the important parts of this practice is, I know here in Charlotte, our group has been reading and studying the precepts really for about the last 2 years or so. And so that's always getting mixed in with everything I do right now. And I had this realization that this practice, of course, is not about just ourselves, obviously. Sometimes we fall into that mode of thinking where our intention is probably not as complete as it should be. And we think, oh, this is a spiritual practice. I'm doing Zazen for myself. I'm trying to wake up. And then you start studying the precepts and you sort of broaden your view a little bit and you begin to realize that there is no self. I'm not doing anything for myself because there is no self there to do anything for. Not to get too philosophical, but we have to understand the Bodhisattva precept that, no one can be free, no one can be saved, so to speak, or free, unless everyone is. When you sit down and do Zazen, it's not about freeing yourself as much as it is making yourself available to the universe so everyone can be free. And I think that can lead to joy, actually, and a sense of greater satisfaction about your practice, because if you fall out of connection with your practice and start clinging to the idea that it's a spiritual practice for you, and you lose sight of the Sangha aspect of this and the precepts of this, then you start becoming more sort of selfish about things, and you're not really completely participating in the Sangha and the whole community spirit of this. And I actually believe that the more that you can make this into a Sangha practice and a community practice, the more joy there is in it. That's been one of my great realizations about Zen practice over the years, because I know when I first became introduced to Zen, it's mainly from reading books, and books are very flat and one-dimensional in a way, and you don't get the sense of community from just reading books. It's very difficult. But when you join a Sangha and when you go to sessions and when you go to retreats and so forth, you begin to really understand, wow, this is not an ascetic practice. This is not a practice where you go out into the wilderness and practice on your own. You're practicing with other people. And that's where you get your energy from. I'm sure everyone listening, if you've ever practiced and done Zazen, you know that sitting in a room physically with other people, you feed off of their energy. And I don't quite know how to explain that. I can't, tell you exactly how that works. But you feel the presence of other people. And when you sit at home alone and nobody else is there, it feels different. It just does. I'm not sure why, but I certainly have noticed that over the years. And that, is probably one of the greatest challenges of lay practice, is that most of us do practice on our own individually. If you're lucky enough to live close enough to a Sangha where you can physically get together, that's great. And of course, now during the pandemic, we haven't been able to do that regardless of where you live or how close you are to other people. Most people are practicing by themselves. So, we turned to Zoom and electronic practice to try to have some kind of connection. And, it doesn't feel the same to me, but it is what we have right now. And I feel sure, we'll be able to resume sitting together physically at some point. I know our group is still doing Zoom, and at this point, we haven't made a commitment to go back to sitting together physically. So who knows when that'll be. So I guess I've rambled around quite a bit, but I want to try and touch back on the idea of joy and some sort of satisfaction in practice. Again, I think the more we sense the Sangha around us and the more we practice together, the more we understand that there is a joy in this practice. There is a sense of satisfaction. Yes, it's a spiritual practice, and it still is quite philosophical in a way, but the more you practice, the more you feel that interconnectedness of things. You realize that, as we're always talking about Indra's web, the interconnectedness of all things. You see how everything does connect together. We're not as isolated as we sometimes feel like we are or think we are. The interactions you have with other Sangha members, and I should also say, when you take this off the cushion and go into your everyday life like we do as lay practitioners, I get up off my cushion and go to a retail job where I'm in the public all day long. And I've said it so many times to my Sangha that to me, that's the greatest challenge to my Zen practice is when I'm at work, not when I'm at home sitting on a cushion, because it seems easy then to be focused and to think about the Dharma. But when I'm away from all of the reminders of the Dharma, when I don't have, an altar, a Buddha statue, or a zafu, or anything around me, I'm not wearing my rakusu, I have no reminders of my Dharma practice, and I'm encountering the public, that's when I have my greatest challenge. But again, I go back to the idea of intention. What is your intention when you're sitting on the zafu, and what is your intention when you get up off the zafu? Should they be different? Is there any difference? It is an enormous challenge, but when you get up off your zazen, your practice should not end. Your zazen may be ending, your seated meditation may be ending, but your practice is not ending. You go out and you encounter people, and those people may be very sympathetic to you and sort of in the same sync with you, or they may be 180 degrees out of sync with you. And you still have to face that and deal with it. And it is a challenge, but it is a challenge that we can do. We're capable of it. It's maintaining that awareness all day long in whatever it is you do. Just, you can't physically return to the cushion all day long when you're doing things, but you can sort of, with your attitude and your intention, you can go back to the cushion, you can remember it, and you can remember, okay, I need to be quiet, I need to listen, I need to go back to a quiet place, and the people I'm encountering will understand that. They'll see it, and it will pull you through. So I would like to now just open it up to everyone who has any comments that they want to make or any questions. To be honest with you, I give very few Dharma talks in Charlotte. We basically sit 2 periods of Zazen on Sunday night, and then we have a Dharma discussion. And our discussion consists of reading a selection from a Zen text. And then after we read it out loud, then everybody just jumps in and makes comments about it. You can comment or you can ask questions, either one. And we just sort of have that kind of back and forth comment. So that's what I'm used to. So I would like to now thank everybody for listening to my Dharma talk. And I'd like to open it up to anybody who wants to ask questions or make comments. Thank you.
I wanted to say something. You said something that meant a lot to me. I'd never had this idea cross my path before, but you said that sitting essentially was making yourself available so that everyone can be free. And that had a lot of meaning. When we say, that we're going to, like with the robe chant and all, help everybody be free. I say it and I think that's a great idea, but functionally, I have no sense that anything I'm going to do is really going to do that. But what you said about just by sitting, putting yourself like out there, so at least that you're not being a bigger drag than you are, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I wish I could take credit for that. But, I've had good teachers, and I've learned a lot, obviously, from Teijo-san and Chimio-san and others. And really, I'd have to give a lot of other people credit for that observation, not just myself.
Well, it maybe I've heard it before, but I never really heard it until just this morning when you said it. So, yeah. And I wanted to ask you something else. The whole idea of Sangha, which, is basic with the Buddha. It seems somehow remarkable that way back then, he put that in place as kind of a core idea, not like a crutch, which is kind of how you could think, well, you can't do it by yourself, so you need people to prop you up. He didn't present it that way at all. And it seems kind of radical in a way, for him to have been aware that would be so vital, because he went and sat under the tree by himself.
Right. And I have to definitely say I'm no expert on the life of the Buddha. I really wish I knew a lot more than I do. But, I guess you could call it, my impression is that he, the story is of his youth is that he practiced a lot of asceticism. He went out really and practiced what were basically Hindu practices and tortured himself, did a lot of extreme practices over the years to try and wake up. But when he finally did wake up, he realized, oh, wait a minute, a lot of that, you can say it was necessary and not necessary, but what he said was the middle way is what works best. And then the very first thing he did, basically, once he woke up, was start sharing it with other people, which I think is the truly amazing thing. Like so many people have observed, one can imagine he would have just turned and walked back out into the forest and lived this incredibly awakened, enlightened life and been happy. But he didn't. He turned right around and started teaching, and he actually taught his entire life until I think he lived into his 80s, and must have taught quite a few people in that length of time. So I think that is part of the source of the idea that no one can be truly free until everyone's free. That was sort of what he was exemplifying right there, is that, hey, I'm not going to sit down and rest because I'm not truly awake until everyone's awake. Now, I don't know how other people might interpret that. Maybe somebody else has a different idea, but everything I've been taught about Zen and about Sangha has always been about this idea that, the four vows are so expansive. You hear, I vow to save all beings, and you think, well, how can that possibly be? But when you bring yourself down to zero and you take yourself completely out of the picture by practicing deeply and just taking yourself out of the picture, you're freeing yourself, but at the same time, you're allowing other beings to be free. I don't expect me to explain it better than that, but that really is the way it works somehow.
Thank you.
Seido, I really appreciate your remarks on the joy of sitting and the joy of this practice, because it was helpful for me to hear that, because that's often something that I forget. I think you had said something about, can be sometimes a very like serious ritualized practice, and which it is, and there is this joyfulness to it that that I just I forget that it's there. And I think that's a good reminder for all of life. I definitely have a tendency to get stuck and hooked and focus on maybe negative aspects, or things that aren't all the bad things, and I forget to bring that more like whole picture, and also acknowledge the joyfulness and the ease and the fun and all the beauty that is life. And I think that's where my sitting practice is so helpful too, when I remember that it's all there. And you had said, like, there's discussions on, is it an easy practice or a difficult practice? And it's, like you said, it's all of that. Or at least that was my interpretation of what you said. Thank you for that. And it came just at the right time too, because I was away from my house for the past few days, and so I wasn't sitting. And this morning was the first time I sat in a couple of days, which is rare for me. And it really, once you mentioned that, the joy of the practice, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of what I experienced this morning some, because I had taken a break, so to speak, from it for a couple of days, and then came back, and it was just like, oh wow, like this is really nice. And so that's definitely something that I want to remember moving forward. So
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So does anyone else have questions or comments? They don't have to be questions, or they can be comments or questions. It can be to do with anything to do with Zen practice.
You said that you missed sitting in person as opposed to Zoom. So how different is sitting on Zoom from sitting alone for you? Does it mostly bridge the gap or not much, or, I haven't been sitting with people because there's just not a group around here to sit with. And so sitting on Zoom has felt like eureka for me, to have another person on a screen over in the corner it's like so much support. But anyway, I wondered from your perspective, because this is not normal for you.
Well, I mean, that's a good observation you made, because I hadn't really thought about, somebody really liking Zoom, and thinking, oh, wow, this is great. But, I can see how, I would agree, Zoom is better than when you sit totally alone with no Zoom. So again, it's that interaction with other human beings, even if it's electronically, it's still better than no interaction at all. It is the way I see it. I guess you could say I was just spoiled at the idea that for so many years I've sat with people. Now, only on Sunday nights, granted, because our Sangha as a group only gets together once a week on Sunday nights, but that's always felt so good. I just have such fond memories over the years of being in that room, because we've been so lucky that we've sat in the same location really literally for 30 years, which is amazing in and of itself, that somebody would have had a spot that we could have sat in for a straight 30 years is just remarkable in and of itself. But I have all these memories down through the years, because the Sangha has changed so much, the members have changed so many times over the years, but there's still been this consistent feeling of getting together and what it feels like to share the sitting experience together, and then the Dharma discussions. It's all been just so nice. And I've missed it over the last now year and a half. And our Sangha still gets together on Sunday night, by virtue of Great Tree's generosity. We're using Great Tree's link to get together on Sunday nights. So we are able to be together, even if it's just electronically. And yes, it's better than if we weren't getting together at all. So, that's the thing about us humans, is we adapt. If you're faced with a challenge, you deal with what alternatives there are. If you just cannot get to a certain spot, then you get to a different spot. You figure out how to practice with whatever you've got in whatever way you can. And it may not always be what you want, but you just make it work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I unmuted now? I think I am.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for this talk. And the discussion has been very helpful. And I wanted to put in a good word for Zoom, in that my current practice is really looking for a teacher. I don't have one person at the moment who is a teacher. And Zoom makes it possible to go all over the world, experiencing different teachers, and sitting with different sanghas. And it's a treasure that when I go and sit on Zoom with another Zen group, pretty much we all do the same thing. We all make a show, we all sit in a similar posture, and it underscores the solid base that for me Zen has. And I'm just really grateful that all of that is possible. And again, thank you for this morning's talk.
Thank you for your comments. I think you brought up an important point. You know, it really is nice that Zen practice, of course, I'm practicing Seido Zen, but you know, you can go anywhere in the world and plug into a Seido Zen group seamlessly because, you know, there's pretty much the same practice schedule in most cases and the same chants, the same philosophy behind it. So it does make it very nice to be able to plug in. And you're right about that. Zoom does bring a whole extra dimension that wouldn't be there if we weren't doing Zoom, when you can experience other Dharma talks from other teachers and from other Sanghas, because every place is a little different. Every teacher has a different emphasis on things, and there are differences. So thank you.
Well, if no one else has any other questions or comments, I guess we should thank Don Seido for a thought-provoking talk. And did you want to say another word, Genjo?
Thank you. I would just say thank you, Seido, and for the talk, and everyone for the discussion, and remind folks about the practice of dana, and that link should be in the chat if you have the means and if you're called to do so.
And I'll just say next week's talk, the title is Zen, Love, and Baseball, given by Jinshin Jane Schumann. So maybe you can join us. And also you can look at the Great Tree site for the schedule of activities through the week if you're interested. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope everyone, you know, was able to glean at least a little bit out of this. I appreciate it. I'm not a great Dharma speaker. It's not something I'm very used to, but you guys make me feel much better about it. So I do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.